I don't know about you guys, but I could watch those guys do that all day long. That was great. Okay, hi, I am Mike Bongiorno, and I'm not from here. I'm from here, the borough of Brooklyn in New York, but not the Brooklyn of hipsters and irony. I came from the Brooklyn of the warriors, spending my formative years in the 1970s and 1980s at a time of crime, decay, and collapse in the city. But also, it was a time of incredible inspiration for me. During drives along the elevated Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, past panoramic and cinematic vignettes of urban slots, opening to expanses of industrial infrastructure, then down into canals of brick and steel, being modulated in light by the overpasses above, and then up again and overlooking horizons and panoramas, broken only by color of concrete and steel, out to the ocean beyond. And then out to the city limits, past infernal landscapes of industrial wastelands and anonymous sculptures and dead space. And then back home to my neighborhood, my turf. You know, there's something incredible about being under an elevated line. The sense of containment, the in-betweenness, the quality of the filtered light as it comes down and it plays off of moving people and vehicles. The muscularity of the geometries of the steel structure and this incredible smell of creosote. It's really sort of sparked an interest for me in two things: an obsession with urban wastelands and urban open spaces, and urban ruins. And for me as well, I look at them as opportunities to create new inventions and opportunities to build on new structures. And it provided a fundamental question for me: how do we go about doing this? How do we turn them into compelling places for people? And then also, how do we do it in a way that's authentic to the place and time that it exists? So I kind of arrive at all this, of course, cumulatively, over time. As a child, these things come on you subconsciously, but they form the basis of the way you start to see the world around you. When I was 14, I was young, I was restless, I was looking for fun. And the kind I looked for, fun I looked for, and the kind of excitement I looked for in a different place. While all of my good friends were doing what good kids do, I was running around in subway tunnels. And day and night I would do this. And it was in one of these tunnels during the day that I had a really pivotal experience. And this was it. It's hard to explain what it feels like to be in one of these tunnels with the shafts of light beaming down through vapors, the primal, essential space, the smell of the dampness, the eerie silence. And then around in a corner, a sudden burst of color through the darkness under light. And lurking around every corner was danger, both human and not. For a 14-year-old kid, this was absolutely exhilarating. It was my only vice. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, didn't do drugs. I only did this. Well, as you can imagine, all good, fun things come to an end. When I was 15, I was caught for criminal trespass by the transit police. You see, my father wasn't around much when I was young, and it wasn't for neglect. It was for the fact that he was always working. There were 5 of us kids. He had to provide for us. It was left to my mother to handle the rest of us, and she had a lot to handle. I remember when my father sat me down the day that I was caught, probably the first real conversation I ever had with him. And he said, you know, there are different ways to find what you're looking for. You just have to ask yourself a different question. And I think the thing that he saw in me, he saw in himself, and he wanted me to stay on course. He also saw that I had a nurturable artistic ability and that I could do something with it. I was lucky. And from that day forward, I've always asked myself a different question. My dad was passionate about the arts and artists. I remember always having mountains of art books laying around the house. And I remember the first time I ever saw a print by the architect and illustrator Giovanni Piranesi. There was something uncanny about the quality of the spaces of invention that he created and what I experienced in subway tunnels. And in his drawings of the ruins of Rome, I could smell the dampness again. I could see that filtered light moving over objects over the course of the day. These massive, austere structures succumbing to the onslaught of nature, and almost like a playground of ruins. In 1988, when I was in architecture school, and starting about then, a series of really amazing monographs started coming out in bookstores in Manhattan by the German photographers Bernd and Hilla Becker. What the Beckers did is they took the common industrial building and they photographed it in a way that elevated it to a piece of sculpture. It transcended its original utilitarian purposes, and it became art. And they shot things from water towers to blast furnaces to gas tanks to mine heads to coal breakers, and then finally the ubiquitous American grain elevator. These were, and still are, the most intoxicating images I've ever seen. And they've sort of created the lens through which I look at the world of objects around me, and the way that I understand and appreciate ruins, and urban leftover spaces. So on this subject of urban leftover spaces, what is that? There's probably no greater culprit than the Highway Cloverleaf. For those who are not familiar with the term cloverleaf, a cloverleaf is a term created by engineers for a highway interchange. Here in Columbus, we have quite a few of them. But you could say, looking at them above from the air, that they could be here, or they could be anywhere else. I think about these conditions a lot. This particular one is right outside my office window. I get to see it all the time. And I think about what the possibilities are there for it to be something else. It's a massive amount of space, unused. To bring it down to earth to you, I work with a colleague of mine to study this condition. And there are 2.2 million square feet of essentially dead space. It's just grass. Grass is a monoculture. It is not a productive landscape. But if I could bring that to more to the scale that we can understand, if you would take two COSI campuses and you would put them together, they would fit in the equivalent area. This would be my Buckeye plug. If you took 40 football fields and put them together, it would add up to that. How about this? Understand it in terms of a home. 258 single-family homes. Think about also what the relationship is between this interchange and the surrounding neighborhoods. They look like they're dying to reach across and touch each other, and yet they can't. So this is an opportunity. Actually, these highway systems and the structures create interesting spaces and forms. And there are other people that have dealt with it before in a similar way. City of Louisville, Kentucky, at the waterfront, the highway basically cut the river off from downtown. And what they did in the planning of Waterfront Park is they slid the city under the highway and extended a park under the highway with circulation systems. In doing so, they eliminated the uniquely separate status that that highway created and created a usable, productive space. And it was connected by dynamic vistas and walkways, both to and under the highway system. And they also incorporated really novel elements like water channels that are swimmable, that change in the quality of sound and light as they move under this highway structure. But similarly, there are other conditions where we have dead spaces going over other things. At the western end of downtown Columbus, Mound Street dies a sad and lonely death. It once connected the central business district to the Whittier Peninsula. It now connects nothing to nothing. And it is abandoned, it is forgotten, and it is in a state of decay and overgrown. New York had a similar thing to the Mound Street overpass. It's called the High Line. A lot bigger, but a similar condition. Abandoned, unused, except for a few urban archaeologists. So we can very well tear down the Mound Street overpass over Interstate 70, or we can turn it into a road, or we can be radical opportunists and reimagine it into something that we could never have thought it would be before, creating novel uses and spurring development around it, creating linkages and a system of connective tissue between buildings and parks and the rest of the city, with areas of repose and engagement, and sights and views of the city yet seen, both in the daytime and at night. But I want to make something perfectly clear. I'm not advocating that we copy the High Line. That would be a complete failure. What I am advocating is the adoption of the same kind of mindset, the kind of thinking that creates the conditions for something like this to happen. It is through that you come to the place of invention. The High Line happened for a reason that was very specific for the time and the place in which it existed. You know, there are some new spaces that we've created almost yesterday that are new urban wasted spaces. So the cap over I-670, High Street, brilliant project, right? You take two walls of buildings and you span them over the highway and you continue the street. By all measures, a success. There's one pesky problem. Just to the west of it are two huge, unaccounted for triangles of concrete, almost the size of the cap itself. They're strange places even from the air. They're uninviting. They're desolate. What can you do with something like this? You know, it's funny. Giorgio de Chirico is one of my favorite painters, and he used to paint these scenes of empty, vacuous urban squares, city squares, expressing feelings of loneliness and alienation. They're incredible paintings. But this is not art. This is our habitat, and it's seemingly uninhabitable. So raise your hand if you would like to join me here for a cup of coffee some late July afternoon. I didn't think so. You know, there are other ways. You know, I don't know how it got to how it ended up being decided to make those things that way. But I do know that it created an opportunity for something else to happen. And something like what we're seeing here, which is called a parklet. A parklet is a small urban park located on top of an unused parking space. So we could do something like that. We can call it a caplet. And they're movable, they're temporary, you can take them, you can leave them. But they're great places for engagement. I mean, look at how happy that guy is to be sitting on a trash container. That brings me to my second part, which is the beautiful and silent urban relic, of which we have a number of those here in Columbus as well, scattered throughout town, really right in our midst and in front of our eyes. In Wineland Park and the south side, we have these cavernous rolling mills. There's an abandoned fire training facility on Green Lawn Avenue, our skeletal rail bridges spanning the river, the sublime grain elevators out on East Main Street. What can we do with those? Well, in the Ruhr Valley of Germany, they asked themselves a similar question. They had an enormous heritage of industry there, and they arrived at a really brilliant answer. They created the Ruhr Valley Industrial Heritage Trail. And so aware were they of the continuum within which their work existed that as a frieze on one of their buildings, they included an homage to the Beckers, those great photographers of industrial archaeology. And it begs a question for me and for all of us. What constitutes a park, really? Is a park the sweet picturesque? Or is it within the same continuum of what Piranesi's playgrounds of ruins were, where we create these incredibly exciting places of intervention? What is a climbing wall? What is a playground? A ropes course. Usually you find them in the woods, right? Why not here? You know, I've been to Costa Rica to do zip lining, and I've been to the Hocking Hills to do zip lining. I've never zip lined off a blast furnace. I think that would be pretty incredible. You know, silos and gas tanks are a lot alike. They hold different kinds of things. In this case, a gas tank holds a scuba diving tank. So you're swimming in an underwater, surrounded by, strange objects without ever leaving the city. Or you're in a rolling mill, a former rolling mill. One night, you're watching a symphony. The next day, there's a BMX race. And the day after that is a TEDx talk. In the evening, these places can be transformed into and have other lives. Enormous structures to be celebrated and illuminated. So this is really about learning how to see, looking out and asking a question about what something could be that it isn't today. So when we look at our grain silos out on East Main Street, are they just dead wall spaces? Or, as they did in Quebec City, are they the projection surfaces for incredible works of art? Is this just a rail bridge? Or our friends in Cleveland celebrated their industrial infrastructure by illuminating it sculpturally in the evening. So look at this image. Is this a grain silo, or is it a scuba diving tank? Is this a rolling mill, or is this the entrance to a concert hall? Is this a dangerous underpass, or is it a future skate park? Is this an unused, unloved fire training tower, or could this be a future zip line course? I look at this and I see a future outdoor drive-in theater. What do you see? This could be an incredible high ropes course, a rappelling tower, an incredible climbing wall. You see, it's all a matter of looking at things from a different perspective. And my dream for Columbus is that we're the kind of place that looks at these things opportunistically, and that we say to ourselves, we would like to be the benchmark city for the mindset that looks at our infrastructure and reinvents it. And I know we can get there. And the way that we can get there is by asking ourselves a different question. Thank you very much.